Welcome to Downshift. My name is Matt and we've just spent a week in Mazda's new CX50 with its hybrid powertrain. And under the skin it shares a lot in common with the car that I just bought, a Toyota RAV4 hybrid. I've been living with this for about a month. We spent the last week in this, and there's a lot of things that we need to cover, both pros and cons, and how these things are similar and how they're different. So let's see how these stack up head to head. Okay, sitting down and having spent time with each of these cars, it's actually been a fairly eye-opening experience. You know, you read the press materials and you get the information, you're like, oh, it's got the same engine, the same transmission, similar all-wheel drive system between these two cars. They should be pretty similar. And sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's not. And again, we're going to cover all that stuff here. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the engine. We're going to start under the hood with the powertrain, and this is a pretty easy point to cover because the engines are exactly the same. Mazda's integrated the 2.5-liter naturally aspirated Toyota engine with the Toyota's 4th-gen hybrid system, which is the same thing that's under the hood of the RAV4 hybrid. So both engines make the same power as well, 219 horsepower. It's hard to nail down a true hybrid torque number, but it's somewhere in the low 200s. I think the engine itself makes 163 pound-feet of torque. The interesting difference is presumably you're looking at these hybrids because of fuel efficiency reasons. Now, the Mazda is about 200 pounds heavier than the Toyota with just the Mazda trappings, some of the interior materials, more leather, etc. And according to the EPA, that has a fuel economy penalty. The Mazda CX50 hybrid is rated at 38 mpg versus the Toyota RAV4 hybrid is rated about 40 mpg. Now, we here on Downshift do our own 35-mile, what we call the Lakeshore Loop fuel economy or efficiency test. I ran it with both these cars on subsequent days back to back, and the big difference was that it was 25 degrees warmer when I did it in the CX50, but based on our testing procedure, we let each car warm up to the point where the hybrid system, and really every car, where it's operating at its normal operating temperature. So the hybrid system is working, it's just the ambient temperatures. There's nothing I can really control. It's true, there's 25 degrees of temperature swing from day to day here in Wisconsin in January. But anyway, we did the fuel economy test, the Lakeshore Loop with the CX50 hybrid, and it came back with 42.8 mpg. That's really, really good. It definitely outpaced the EPA rating, and then we ran it with the RAV4. Now again, 25 degrees colder in the RAV4, and it came back with 41.7 mpg, so 1.1 mpg less in the RAV4, again with that ambient temperature delta. So probably pretty close under similar conditions, which is what I would expect, but you're not seeing a huge quotes, big fuel economy penalty with that extra 200 pounds in the CX50. Now both cars 0 to 60, probably not why you're watching this video, but both cars obviously have similar or the same performance. They've got the same all-wheel drive, same ECVT, and then the same horsepower and really torque as well. So it's 0 to 60 in like 7.3-ish seconds. But engine for engine, obviously they're the same. They're a little bit more coarse and that kind of like Toyota raspiness when you get the engine going. There's a little bit of a torque kick as the engine turns on, going from gas to electric, or electric to gas, I should say. So it is more noticeable than something like my wife's Honda CR-V hybrid, which again, we'll talk about head to head with the CR-V in another video. The next topic that we'll touch on is drivetrain. And both cars come standard with all-wheel drive. And both cars have the E all-wheel drive system that came from the RAV4. So it's a battery operated or electric motor in the rear that doesn't have an actual physical mechanical linkage, which is different for the CX50. A gas and turbo CX50 is going to have a physical linkage between the front and the rear axle. But in the hybrid, it's just an E motor operating off the battery. So even on the dashboard, when it says that maybe your battery is getting low, it's never going to go completely empty because it's always going to keep some reserve or some power in reserve, so it can send power to the rear wheels if you're in like slippery conditions, if you need extra power and torque to maybe merge onto the highway and things like that. And it's the same exact system in the RAV4. Obviously, Mazda was able to take that from Toyota. And you're probably wondering then what effect that has on the driving experience. Now, a Mazda has a different driving signature than a Toyota. And you would think, okay, they've got the same engine, the same transmission, and the same all-wheel drive setting. How are these going to be different on the road? And I'm here to tell you that they are noticeably different on the road, actually. There's pros and cons. We'll start with the Mazda. It does have, I will say, overall, a familiar kind of Mazda driving profile, Mazda signature maybe. The steering feels way better in the Mazda. It's got a little bit more heft, a little bit less play. It feels more disciplined. Also, the steering wheel feels a little bit nicer with the leather wrapping. So the steering is definitely better in the Mazda. Additionally, the body and chassis control is better in the Mazda when you're driving a little bit hard. The downside of that is the Mazda CX50 hybrid is noticeably stiffer than the RAV4 hybrid. And this is the XSE. It's got the blue shock towers and everything. So this is Toyota's sporty orientation for the RAV4 hybrid. And yet the Mazda is still significantly, I don't know if significantly, but definitely noticeably more stiff than what you get in the Toyota. I would go so far as to say that this is a bit overdamped. I think the Mazda just has a tendency to feel a little bit busy over like medium pavement. You get the little bit of that like kind of consistent jounce factor. So there is a little bit there. I do like, again, the steering is better. The braking feels a little bit more organic in the Mazda, but it kind of goes back to the ride. Also, the Mazda rides 2 inches higher. You're not getting 2 additional inches of ground clearance, but to make all the hybrid stuff work underneath, the Mazda is going to be a bit 2 inches higher than it would normally be in the gas and the turbo car for the CX50. And I did kind of feel that when I was stepping in. I didn't have any extra ground clearance, but I did notice a little bit of a chunk underneath the door as you were stepping into the car. It felt like maybe I had to like duck a little bit getting into the cockpit. Not something that really is going to like stand out to you a lot, but just something I noticed right away and then kind of didn't really notice after a couple days driving the car. But just something to note, it's going to be a little bit higher. It's going to ride a little bit higher than it would if you're getting just the gas or the turbo car without that additional benefit perhaps of ground clearance. But behind the wheel of the RAV4, it's pleasant and inoffensive. The Mazda is definitely going to be a little bit more rewarding if you want to drive fast or have fun, but the Toyota is going to do maybe a little bit more balanced things a little bit better, or relaxed things better. It's going to have a little bit more suspension, a little bit more suspension and compression, and give you a little bit more cushy ride and more relaxing feel. The steering is going to be a little bit lighter. You know, it's just going to be the more relaxed driving experience. But if you do care about the driving experience, you probably will want to go the Mazda route, so long as you can tolerate a little bit more suspension bounce and a little bit more stiffness. Which leads me to another topic where Mazda generally shines, and it's in terms of styling. The CX50 I still think is one of the better looking in the class. I think it's got like, Mazda does a really good job combining like aggression with some machismo here, with maybe some of the front cladding and almost like faux skid plating up front, because this is their more off-roady version. The CX5 is going to be their more on-road ready one. So they do a good job combining like expensive and elegant feeling with a little bit more machismo, let's say. The problem with it though, and this is not specifically just the hybrid, but it's the normal gas and the turbo CX50 as well, is they just slap these enormous wheel arch cladding black, scratchy black pieces of plastic on the side and around the entire car. And it's not necessary. A little bit of cladding, sure, I get it, but it just seems so inflated. It's like normal cladding got stung by a bee, had an allergic reaction, and then just swelled up. If you're averse to the cladding, like myself, Mazda is working on a new CX5. That was a little bit in contention when they dropped the CX50. People didn't know if they were going to replace the CX5, if it was going to go away. Me and my wife previously owned CX5s each and had a great time. So I personally like the styling of the CX5 a little bit more, body colored, gloss, wheel arch cladding, but this is not a video about the CX5. As it pertains to the RAV4, this is, again, styling is going to be subjective, whatever your taste is. I do think I like the look of the CX50 a little bit more. The RAV4, it's on the eve of a new generation, and the styling kind of reflects that. This is a pretty tasty spec. I like the silver, I like the black, that's why I bought it. The XSE with the LED headlights and then the vertical kind of like fog lights underneath. It looks good for a RAV4, but it's an aged design that we've seen for a number of years now. We still have black arch cladding, but it's more like geometric and almost hexagonal, but it's gloss. It's not the scratchy black plastic. So it doesn't kind of cheapen the look a little bit in the same way that it happens to do on the CX50. But you know, the CX50 has these like really rounded and kind of flared shoulders in the front over the front wheels, and then flared rear hips over the rear wheels. I think the CX50 just looks a little bit better, but again, it's totally subjective, whatever you like. But now we're going to switch gears and talk about something a little bit more practical, and it's trunk and cargo space. I'm gonna cut right to the chase. The Toyota RAV4's trunk is bigger. This is a classic Mazda thing. Mazda generally brings a tighter, more maybe sporty oriented feel that's a little bit smaller. It always was with the CX-5 that we've had in the past, and it stays kind of true with the CX-50. It's bigger than the trunk in the CX-5, the CX-50's trunk, but it is 7.5 cubic feet smaller than what you get in the RAV4. And then when you fold the seats down, that about doubles. So with the seats down, the capacity in the RAV4 is about 15 cubic feet larger than what you're getting in the CX-50. It's not to say that the trunk area in the CX-50 is impractical by any means. In fact, I actually kind of like the area in the CX-50 because you have things like grocery bag hangers, and you have a spare tire, and you also have the ability to fold the rear seats from the trunk, which is not something that can be said for things like the RAV4 or my wife's CR-V, or really a lot of things here. So there's some versatility in the trunk of the CX-50 that you're not getting in other places. It just happens to be a little bit smaller of a trunk. And of course, the hybrid component takes away about 2 cubic feet of space in the trunk from a gas CX-50. So trunk capacity wars, go to the Toyota. And we'll touch on towing real quick. It's about 1,500 pounds in the Mazda, and I see conflicting numbers online, but it says about 1,750 in the Toyota. They're pretty similar, so I don't see a lot of people towing with either of these cars, at least in the wild. I don't see it that often, but you can tow more with the CX-50 if you don't get the hybrid. So if you need to tow something, I think you can do like 3,500 pounds in a CX-50 turbo. And then we start to talk about the passenger capacity, not just cargo capacity, but we'll start with the rear seats. Both of these cars operate in pretty much the hottest segment in the auto industry. It's just kind of the Swiss Army knife size of car. So you have good trunk space, you have good second row space, and good front row space. The thing is, the battery components live underneath the rear seats in the CX-50, and I believe in the RAV4 as well. And that has an effect on your headspace in the CX-50. Like for example, I'm 6'1", and I have like an inch or 2 or 3 of knee room in the CX-50, which is great. It's more than I would have in a CX-5, but I have shockingly little headroom. I'm pretty proportionate leg to torso, so I don't have like an outrageous alien Michael Phelps torso length. So I was a little bit surprised to see how little headroom that I had in here. Again, I think it's just the hybrid battery. It's taking up a little bit more space because I have had more headroom in the back seat of a CX-50 that isn't the hybrid. But in the CX-50, you can get things like a panoramic roof, you've got air vents, you've got a map pocket, you've got cup holders, you've got some of the usual stuff. But in the RAV4, it just kind of takes it a little bit of a step further. So you can get a panoramic roof in the RAV4, you can get heated rear seats in the RAV4, which you can't get. And then the same sort of stuff, air vents, map pockets, cup holders, the same kind of deal. I will say, as far as like detailing and stitching wise, in the Mazda, you're getting kind of that tan on black interior, so that kind of like caramel stitch, which has that cross stitch down the center, is really pretty. In the RAV4 hybrid, you're getting kind of that blue accented seat. If you go up to the RAV4 Prime, the plug-in hybrid, you'll get red accents through the seat, I believe, if my memory serves. We were in a RAV4 Prime last year. So in terms of the actual space in the rear seat, I think you get a few more things in the Toyota, and you get more space in the Toyota. So it's just a little bit better optimized, but again, you're kind of paying for that lower, more sleeker, sexy profile shape on the outside in the design in the Mazda, and you pay for it a little bit in terms of headroom and cargo capacity. Also, 2 things I forgot to mention. In the RAV4, you can recline the rear seats. You can't do that in the Mazda, but neither car has rear window shades, which I might like to start seeing, and maybe we'll see in the new generation RAV4 that's coming out later this year, or early 26. So if the Toyota won the back seat contest, the Mazda is going to win the front seat contest, or just kind of the overall cabin experience contest. And you kind of expected this. Mazda's that brand that kind of plays in between the mainstream, the Toyotas, the Hondas, the Kias, versus, a more upmarket, maybe like an Acura or a Lexus, or maybe knocking on the door of maybe even a BMW. It's not full luxury tier like you would see in maybe like an X3 or a GLC, but in the Mazda, the interior is noticeably nicer, both in terms of materials and also just in terms of overall design, and I think also in terms of build quality. It's very solid in there. You get this really nicely leather wrapped dash with the cross caramel stitching, and there's like actual squish and give and padding on that leather portion of the dash. It's that little tiny bit that kind of makes the whole car feel more expensive. The design in the Mazda is also just generally more minimal and more modern. It's a lot newer than the design in the RAV4. We've had this design from the interior from a large perspective since about 2018. So this is a pretty familiar, I don't want to use the word tired, but I just did, to describe the interior of the RAV4. Now, I will say, this is a little bit more utilitarian. There's still a lot of knobs, buttons, and switches in the RAV4. There's knobs, buttons, and switches in the Mazda as well, but they're bigger and rubberized in the Toyota. And for January in Wisconsin, let's say you have big chunky gloves or mittens on, it is kind of nice. But there's more scratchy black plastic in the RAV4. There's some rattling coming from the back seat in the RAV4. So the overall cabin experience just isn't on the same plane as the Mazda. If I were to kind of tier off the segment, considering things like the CR-V, RAV4, CX50, CX5, Forester, Tucson Sportage, and others, I would say that the RAV4 is kind of towards the bottom of the list, at least in 2025 now. Again, it's ready for a new generation that's coming soon, but it's just old, it doesn't feel quite as nice or expensive, and the Mazda's on the sharp end of the stick. It may not give you every single little feature, but it does it in an almost Lexus, almost Acura level of quality and refinement and near luxury that you're not getting in the Toyota. But then you're going to dive more deeply into the granularity of technology and some of the features that you get in each of these cars. And I'm going to make sure that I read off my list so I don't forget anything. Starting with the Mazda, you do have a head-up display. That's really nice. You don't have a 360 camera on the hybrid, which is a bit odd because I'm pretty sure there was a 360 camera on the last CX50 Turbo that I drove. So to remove that or decontent it when you can have it on the RAV4, maybe that's why Toyota, when they sold a bunch of the RAV4 to Mazda for their CX50 hybrid, said, well, we're going to keep the 360 camera for us. No 360 camera for the Mazda. The Mazda also doesn't get a digital rear view mirror, which you can get in the Toyota. I'm kind of hit or miss about that, but if it's important to you, if you constantly have your trunk filled up or you've got tall people in the back seat, it might be nice to have a rear view digital mirror that uses the camera out the back. The Mazda CX50 also only has a semi-digital instrument cluster, which is different than you would get in a CX90 or a CX70. Those are fully digital, and you can also get a fully digital instrument cluster on your RAV4. Your center screen in the Mazda is that 10.25 inch system. It is pretty nice, generally speaking. We've tried it in a bunch of different cars. It's kind of like touch screen and then not touch screen in certain instances, like the native system when you're not in CarPlay or Android Auto, which is wireless, by the way, for both, which is very nice. But in the CX50, you have to be in CarPlay to use the touch screen. Now, I will say the screen is a little bit further away in the CX50, so I do find myself using the little Mazda wheel on your center console, and it does work really well. It's familiar, especially my wife and I came from CX5s. It's easy to use. I actually kind of prefer using the wheel than the touch screen in the Mazda. Now, that said, it would be nice to just kind of like standardize. It can either be touchscreen all the time or touchscreen none of the time, but it's the weird like going back and forth between CarPlay and then the native system. Can I touch it? Can I not? Just kind of standardize it, Mazda, I think would be my takeaway. It's all touchscreen all the time in the RAV4. There's no option for like a center control dial, so there's no question about it. You just either operate the system using the steering wheel controls or the actual touch screen on the dash. But it's close enough on the dash where you can reach and touch stuff, even on the far side of the screen, a little bit easier than in the CX50. And then you get things like a wireless charger on each. So just overall, the RAV4 is bringing more features, more modern features than you're going to get in the CX50. That's kind of typical Mazda. We kind of generally ding them a little bit in terms of technology because they don't quite bring the most competitive, the most modern, the most cutting edge systems for their technology. And that actually translates also to their safety suite. Now again, in the CX70 that we've driven and the CX90 that we've driven, we've had pretty decent driver assist stuff. Adaptive cruise, lane keep assist, kind of like, highway driving assist type stuff in other Mazdas, and it's not here. Again, I don't know because you can get the Toyota Safety Sense whatever system in here, which does a pretty good job of auto or adaptive cruise, lane keep. It works pretty well in the Toyota, but again, I wonder if that was one of the places where Toyota was like, well, Mazda, you can have adaptive cruise, but we're not gonna let you have like a lane keep assist. It has that passive system in the CX50 where it'll kind of nudge you after you've gone out of the lane halfway, but it doesn't have the actual like lane centering, kind of relax and just leave your hands on the wheel thing on the highway that you're gonna get in the Toyota or even the CR-V and definitely the Koreans, the Hyundais and the Kias. So just not quite as robust technology suite as in the Toyota. And then we're going to talk about the most important thing for a lot of people, and it's the almighty dollar. What is going to cost less or be the better bang for your buck? Now, starting off, the Mazda CX50 is $34,000 to start for the hybrid. All-wheel drive, the same kind of mechanicals between the two. The Toyota starting off is $2,000 less at $32,000. So there is a pretty big delta at base, but when you start to option these things up, when you get to an XSE or a Limited versus a topped-out CX50, whatever the top trim is, like Platinum or Premium Plus or whatever it is, each one is going to be about $40,000. So they're within like $100 or $200 of each other when you get to, you know, a more spec'd out version. If you can get away with the base or, you know, less feature content, the Toyota will save you money. But if you want all of the stuff, they're going to end up being about the same money, which then begs the question, what's more important to you? Like in the CX50's case, if the driving experience, and like by that I mean the spirited driving experience, and the exterior styling and the interior styling and design and materials is more important to you, then I might lean the Mazda direction. But if you just want the most recent driver assist stuff, or the tech, or the biggest trunk, or a bigger back seat, or, you know, just more stuff, more boxes to tick, and you don't care as much about the driving experience, then the Toyota might be the better thing for you. But the point of this whole video, I guess, is what I'm trying to say is, you're not going to make a bad call with either of these cars. These are some of the best value cars that you can get. They both get incredible fuel economy. They're both going to be dead nuts reliable. They look all right, depending on, you know, what style you prefer. You can have it either way. So you're not going to make a bad choice. The Mazda's missing a couple features here and there, but the Toyota also doesn't drive quite as nice. So there's going to be trade-offs, pros and cons. But with that, those are how the Mazda CX50 hybrid and the Toyota RAV4 hybrid compare. So I hope this has been helpful. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned, because we will compare this CX50 to my wife's Honda CR-V, and those two will be quite a bit more different, and yet they, I think, compare a little bit closer. So stay tuned, we'll see you then, and thanks for watching.